Hey there, Shiloh. It is good to be able to come be in Bible study with you. I'm in Culpeper, Virginia. It is cold today. Whew. Like it took me a while to. I'm still not fully warmed up, but I'm back in the hotel room finally. But man, it was cold today. Anyway, we're working along here, but I'm really happy to be able to come to you in this Bible study for in this way and do these Bible studies like this. I hope y'all are getting a lot out of it. And I'm tweaking format a little bit every time, trying to keep these shorter because I know it's a lot. Today we're on Genesis, the second part of Genesis, so we're doing the second half. So this is pretty much chapters 12 through 50. It covers a bunch of ground. So we're going to start though with this video from the Bible Project. Once again, just a reminder, Bible Project, great resource, fantastic resource. These animated videos that do it for every book of the Bible, they're terrific. I love them. And so I hope you've been enjoying them too. Let's go ahead, get to the video, then we'll come back and we'll have some time for you all to have some discussion. Or if you're at home or by yourself, journal. I really do encourage you though, in order to get a lot out of this study, I encourage you to take some time to discuss, take some time to journal, take some time to answer the questions, to tackle some of these things. It'll help us. It just helps, just let this sink in a little bit, what we're talking about. That way it doesn't just wash over your back and just you forget it before you know it. So I want these summaries of these books, these big important things to really stick with us. So all right, going to the video and then we'll come right back.
The book of Genesis. In the first video, we saw how chapters 1 through 11 set up the basic storyline of the Bible. God has created all things, and he makes humans in his image to rule the world on his behalf. The humans choose sin and rebellion, and so the world spins out of control into violence and death, all leading up to the rebellion and scattering of the people in Babylon. And so the big question is, what is God going to do to rescue and redeem his world? Well, out of that scattering at Babylon, the author traces a genealogy of just one family that leads eventually to a man named Abram, later known as Abraham. And God's promise to Abraham at the beginning of chapter 12 opens up a whole new movement in the story. God calls Abraham to leave his home and go to the land of Canaan, which God says will become his one day. And in that land, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to make his name great and to bless him. Now, these promises are connected back to earlier parts of the book. So Babylon had arrogantly tried to make a great name for itself, and that didn't go over very well. But God, in his generosity, is going to bestow a great name on this no-name guy, Abraham. And God's blessing of Abraham echoes all the way back to that original blessing God gave humanity in the beginning. So the question is, why is God going to bless Abraham and his family? And the last line of God's promise makes this clear. So that all the families of the earth will find God's blessing in you. Now, this is key for understanding the whole rest of the biblical story. God's plan is to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. And this is why the whole rest of the Old Testament story is just going to focus on this one family, eventually called the people of Israel. This is also why Israel will later be called a kingdom of priests at Mount Sinai. God wants to use them to show all of the other nations what he's like. And ultimately, this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets and poets who say that its fulfillment will come through Israel's messianic king, whose reign will bring justice and peace to all of the nations. Now, at this point of the story, none of that's clear. You just have to keep reading and watch the promise develop. And so the rest of the book focuses on Abraham and his family. First, Abraham himself, then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons. And the stories about each generation, they're united by two main themes. So first, each generation of Abraham's family is marked by repeated failure. They just keep making really bad decisions that mess up their lives and that put God's promise in jeopardy. However, God remains faithful to them. He keeps rescuing them from themselves and reaffirming his commitment to bless them and bless the nations through them despite their failings. So the Abraham stories. God had promised Abraham a huge family, but on 2 different occasions, he's afraid for his life because other men are attracted to his wife, and so he denies that he's even married to her, which creates, of course, all of these problems. And not only that, Abraham and his wife Sarah, they can't have children, and so Sarah arranges for Abraham to sleep with one of their servant girls, which also creates all of these problems in the family. But each time, God bails Abraham out. And in chapters 15 and 17, God even formalizes his promise to Abraham with an official commitment called a covenant. This is a classic scene. God invites Abraham to look up at the night stars and to count them. And he says, that's how numerous your family's going to be. And despite all of the odds, having no kids and no way to have any at the moment, Abraham looks up in the sky and simply trusts God's promise. And God responds by entering into a covenant with Abraham, promising that he will become a father of many nations, that God's blessing may come to the whole world. God asked Abraham to mark his family with a sign of the covenant, circumcision of all the male boys in the family. This is a symbol to remind them that the fruitfulness of their family is a gift from God. And so Abraham has lots of kids eventually, and he dies at a good old age. Now, the Jacob stories play out these themes even more dramatically. From birth, Jacob lives up to the meaning of his name, which is deceiver. He cheats his brother Esau out of his inheritance and blessing, and he does it by deceiving his old blind father, no less, and then he just takes off. He goes on to take 4 wives, even though he really only loves one, Rachel, and this creates all of these rivalries in the family. The only thing that humbles Jacob is being deceived by his uncle Laban, who cheats him out of years of his life. The tables have finally turned. And so it's a humbled Jacob that returns to his homeland. And in a very strange story, Jacob ends up wrestling with God as he demands that God bless him. Some things never really change, do they? However, God honors his determination, and he passes Abraham's blessing on to him. And he renames Jacob as Israel, which means wrestles with God. Now, it's this last part of the book, the story of Jacob's sons, where all the themes come to a head. Jacob loves his second to youngest son, Joseph, more than any of the others, and he gives him this special jacket. And the 10 older sons come to hate Joseph, and so they kidnap him, and they plan to kill him, but instead they decide to just sell him into slavery in Egypt, where he ends up in prison. Talk about family failure. But God is with Joseph, and he orchestrates Joseph's release from prison, and Pharaoh ends up elevating Joseph to second in command over all of Egypt. And so Joseph saves the nation of Egypt during a famine. And he also ends up saving his brothers and his family from starving to death. And so once again, we can see the folly and the sin of Abraham's family is met with God's faithfulness, who subverts even the evil of the brothers into an occasion to save life. And this is actually what Joseph says right near the end of the book. He says to his brothers, you all planned this for evil, but God planned it for good to save many lives. Now, these words are strategically placed at the end of the book because they summarize not only the story of Joseph and his brothers, but the book as a whole. From Genesis 3 onward, humans keep acting selfishly and doing evil, but this God is not going to leave his world to its own devices. He remains faithful and determined to bless people despite their failures. You can see this especially in how that mysterious promise about the descendant of the woman gets developed throughout the book. So remember, Genesis 3, God promised that this wounded victor would come and crush the snake and defeat evil at its source. And the author then connects this promise directly to the line of Abraham. This is a part of how God's going to bring his blessing to the nations. Now, from Abraham, this promise gets connected to Judah, the 4th son of Jacob. And this is how. In an extremely important poem in chapter 49, in aging Jacob, he's on his deathbed, he wants to bless his 12 sons. And when he comes to Judah, Jacob predicts that Judah will become the tribe of Israel's royal leaders, and that one day a king will come who will command the obedience of all the nations and fulfill God's promise to restore the garden blessing to all of the world. And then after this, Jacob dies. And later, Joseph dies too. And the growing family remains in Egypt. And so the book of Genesis ends with all of these future hopes and promises left hanging and undeveloped. And it forces you to turn the page to see how it's all going to turn out. But for now, That's the book of Genesis.
All right, like I said, I know that was a lot of information, but let's see if we can kind of summarize it down a little bit. So the big picture here, chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis, were basically God and the whole world, right? So God makes earth, makes a world for humanity, and then human sin comes in. It's basically the ruin of God's world. So that's like chapters 1 and 2, and then chapters 3 through 11. Now, in chapters 12 through 50, we really get God and Abraham's family. Like the video said, 12 through 25 deals with Abraham, 26 through 27 deals with Isaac, 28 through 36 is Jacob, and 37 through 50 is Joseph. Now, the key themes here in Genesis 12 through 50, one of the first things is that God basically initiates his plan to rescue humanity through his covenant with the family of Abram. Now, for those of you that might get confused, this whole plan for the covenant happens in Genesis 12, 15, and 17. In chapter 17, verse 5, Abram's name is changed to Abraham. All right. So if we say Abram or if I say Abraham, like it gets used interchangeably a little bit. I know that can get kind of confusing as to why. So I think I have, yes. So one of our first questions. So God decides to bless all the nations through this one individual. So Genesis 11 is kind of where this happens, the Tower of Babel, and then he chooses Abram. What does that tell us about God? This is my question for us. What kind of character traits of God are displayed in God's decision to bless all nations through Abraham, even after the disaster of Babel? Remember, Babel was people, the hubris of people, right? The pride of people that were trying to touch the skies, to be better than God, to be like God. What character traits of God are displayed in God's decision to bless all nations through Abraham after the disaster of Babel? All right, take some time, journal, discuss, pause, come back. All right, so moving into the actual chapters here, the next part after kind of this whole initiation of the plan to rescue humanity through the covenant of the family of Abraham, then we get into God basically God's blessing to the nations through Abraham. It's the foundational story for the rest of the Bible. So that very first part there in Genesis is God blessing humanity in the beginning. And then humanity has this whole rebellion and sin and this curse, fractured relationships, death. God restores the promise through the line of Noah and then to Abraham. And God repeats the promise of blessing to the nations to even each generation after Abraham. So we have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, then Joseph, and beyond. It keeps going and going and going. Paul, even in Ephesians and Romans, describes the church as those who have received the blessing of Abraham in Jesus and have become part of his family. So we're just all get to be part of that family, ever growing, ever widening family. So like they said in the video, you saw that there's this trope that kind of continues and continues over and over and over again. The whole idea that the family messes up and God helps them anyway, right? The family doesn't do well and God still is there for them. I went over this in the video. You saw a couple of the examples. Abraham, for example, tries to give his wife away twice. Not just once, but twice, in Genesis 12 and Genesis 20. Sarah even gets in on this horrible behavior, and she tries to force God's hand to give them a child by having Abraham sleep with Hagar. That's in Genesis 16 and 21. Isaac actually does give away his wife, Rebekah, in Genesis 26. Jacob's a thief, a liar. He gains the blessing from his father by basically stealing it, cheating his brother out of it. Joseph's brothers, they try to kill him. They're terrible. Joseph's brothers are absolutely horrible. The whole point, though, to all of those little vignettes that get played out and played in, Abraham's family is so dysfunctional, unbelievably dysfunctional, and yet the promises of God are still fulfilled. It's not because of Abraham's family. They mess up. It's because of God's faithfulness. It's not because of anything that Abraham's family does. It's because of God's faithfulness. You could tally up all the ways that Abraham and Sarah make bad decisions, threaten to destroy this blessing that God's given them. Here's a question. This is something to talk about. So, take all these mistakes that they make, right? Take all these things that they do, and yet God still helps them. Why should this, I think the first part's easy. Why is this a comfort? This idea that Abraham's family is so dysfunctional and beyond help, and yet God still decides to get stuff done through them. Why is it comforting? The second part of the question, why is it challenging? It should be both. Why is this idea that Abraham's family is just a bunch of failures, and yet God still uses them, God still helps them to build the entire nation? Why is this comforting for us? And then, why is this challenging for us? Take a moment to discuss, pause, journal, do what you do, come right back. All right, hopefully you've unpaused, gotten to discuss a little bit of that. And so, like we said, they do things, they mess up, and God continues to try to help, right? So God rescues Sarah twice, Rebecca from the folly of their husbands. God provides an heir for Abraham and Sarah, even though they tried to do it on their own, the wrong way. God protects Jacob, even though he's just selfish and a liar. God eventually gives the blessing to Jacob, the wrestling thing. It's kind of fun. God transforms the evil of Joseph's brothers into something that ends up saving the lives of many, many other nations, not only Egypt, but just the area around it. His family, Joseph, is incredible. And in fact, Joseph gives us the kind of theme for all of Genesis there in 50:20. Look what has been planned for evil, and yet God brings about good. That's like the entire book right there. Evil happens. We do it. Not just happens, but we do it. Evil comes into the world, and what does God do? God takes it for good. God makes things good. This is that pattern, and this pattern comes in and out throughout the Bible. Speaking of patterns that are in and out throughout the Bible, also is this pattern of God using people who we probably wouldn't. God uses people all the time that are considered weak or marginalized. God, for example, usually in a story, the firstborn would be the hero of the story, and yet God chooses Abel, not Cain, Isaac, not Ishmael, Jacob, not Esau, Joseph, not Reuben. Happens over and over and over again. God moves towards people who are rejected. Hagar and Ishmael in Genesis 21, 8 through 20. Leah, the unloved wife, Genesis 29, 31 through 35. Joseph was the despised brother in Genesis 37 through 50. God continually uses the people who are on the margins, who are on the outside. One more question for discussion, and we'll wrap up. Hopefully I haven't taken too long for you all. So one more discussion question, and we'll wrap up for the day. How do Joseph's words there at the end, when he says that part there in Genesis 50:20, let me make sure I have it pulled up. I'm going to pull up Genesis 50:20 real quick. I'm trying to also use my iPad. Genesis It's 50:20. All right. I want to read this to make sure I get the words. Joseph tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." I just said that is a great kind of summary of what Genesis is about. How does that work, right? How do Joseph's words to his brothers summarize God's role both in not only the Joseph story, but the entire story so far, the entire book of Genesis? What do you all think? Take some time to journal, discuss, talk it out. Hopefully you paused. All right, welcome back. Once again, thank you so much for joining this part 2 of Genesis. I was talking to Jetta about the study, and if y'all have questions, anything like that, feel free to send a message or, text. Let me know. I'm actually trying to workshop, if y'all have any resources or any ideas for this, a way of doing like a forum or some kind of discussion board type thing online that we can access, to where if y'all are in study and you have some questions, you can maybe send it to this and we can respond and reply and talk and have just more active discussion too. I'm not quite sure how to do that. So if you have any thoughts, suggestions on things, any ways to improve study, whatever things you'd like done better, or if I'm doing great, just let me keep doing it, then that's fine too. I won't complain. Thank y'all for joining Bible study. It's been great to do this. I'm having fun with it. Next week, we will go right into Exodus. See you then.